Steve Harvey had seen thousands of contestants over his decades of hosting Family Feud. Loud ones, shy ones, competitive ones, nervous ones. But he'd never seen someone quite like Maya Johnson. And it would take him nearly 30 minutes of filming to realize why something felt so profoundly wrong. The cameras were rolling. The audience was energized. The Johnson family from Philadelphia stood at their podium ready to compete against the Martinez family from San Diego. Everything looked normal, perfectly normal. Until it was. Maya Johnson was 16 years old, with long dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing. She wore a simple blue cardigan over a white shirt, standing at the end of her family's podium between her mother, Patricia, and her older brother, James. When the family was introduced, everyone waved and smiled. Everyone except Maya. She offered a small, polite smile, but her hands stayed clasped in front of her, pressed tightly together as if holding something invisible. The game began with the typical energy. Patricia, Maya's mother, was quick on the buzzer. Her father, Robert, delivered confident answers. Her brother James cracked jokes with Steve that got genuine laughs from the audience. Her Aunt Linda played off Steve's reactions with perfect timing. They were a strong family, cohesive, supportive, and Maya stood quietly at the end, nodding along, smiling at the right moments, but never speaking. At first, Steve didn't notice. He was too busy working the crowd, playing up the Martinez family's competitive spirit, doing his signature reactions to unexpected answers. But during the third round, something shifted in his awareness. A tiny discrepancy that his subconscious caught before his conscious mind could name it. The question was, name something people do when they're nervous. James had just given a solid answer. Bite their nails, which lit up the number 3 spot. The Johnson family cheered. Robert high-fived his son. Patricia clapped enthusiastically, and Maya smiled. That same small, controlled smile, her hands still clasped tightly in front of her. Steve glanced at her. Just a quick look, nothing more. But something in that glance caught. Something about the way she stood so perfectly still while everyone around her moved. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes. The way she seemed to be there and not there at the same time. But the show kept moving. Questions were asked, answers were given, points accumulated. The Johnson family was doing well, leading by a comfortable margin going into the 4th round. All right, Steve announced, his energy filling the studio. Johnson family, you're doing great. Now, this next question is for Maya. He turned to face the 16-year-old at the end of the podium, his smile warm and encouraging. The audience applauded, ready to see the youngest family member step up. Maya, you ready? Steve asked. Maya's smile flickered slightly. She nodded. Okay, here we go. Name something you might find in a teenager's bedroom. The audience chuckled at the question. Steve waited for Maya's answer, his hand ready to gesture toward the board. 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds. Maya's mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but no words came out. Her mother, Patricia, leaned in close. Clothes, honey, Patricia whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. Say clothes. Clothes, Maya repeated softly, her voice barely audible. Steve pointed to the board. Clothes. The answer lit up at number 2. The family celebrated, but Steve's expression had changed. The professional smile was still there, but behind it, something was calculating, questioning. He watched as the family continued playing, watched as Maya stood quietly through 2 more rounds, watched as every time someone addressed her directly, her mother or brother would lean in, whisper something, and Maya would nod or give a one-word response. It was during the fast money round that Steve made his decision. The Johnson family had won. They were now facing fast money, the final round where 2 family members answer 5 questions in hopes of scoring 200 points. Patricia had gone first, scoring 147 points. Now it was Maya's turn. The family had specifically chosen her as their second player, which Steve found interesting. Usually families put their strongest, most vocal members in fast money. Maya walked at the center mark, her hands still clasped in front of her. Steve noticed they were shaking slightly. "All right, Maya," Steve said gently, his voice lower than usual, more personal. "You need 53 points to win $20,000 for your family. You ready?" Maya nodded, but her eyes were focused somewhere past Steve, somewhere in the middle distance. "Okay, 25 seconds on the clock. Name a place people go to relax." Maya's lips moved, but no sound came out. The seconds ticked away. 5, 10, 50. "Maya," Steve prompted gently. "Beach," her mother called out from backstage. "Say beach, baby, beach," Maya whispered. "Beach." "Good answer. Name something people do on a first date." Again, silence. Maya's breathing was visible now, rapid and shallow. "Talk," her father's voice came from backstage. "Talk," Maya repeated. Steve stopped. He looked at Maya, really looked at her, and saw what he should have seen 30 minutes ago. This wasn't shyness. This wasn't nervousness about being on television. This was something deeper. This was a girl who had learned to disappear. "Hold up," Steve said, raising his hand to the production booth. "Stop the clock." The countdown timer froze at 12 seconds. The audience murmured, confused. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't how fast money worked. Steve set down his cards and walked closer to Maya. He knelt slightly, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "Maya," he said softly, his voice stripped of all performance. "Look at me, sweetheart." Maya's eyes slowly focused on Steve's face. And in that moment of direct eye contact, Steve saw it all. The fear, the exhaustion, the desperate desire to be heard fighting against the learned habit of staying silent. "How long have you been invisible?" Steve asked, his voice so quiet that only Maya and the microphones could hear. Maya's carefully maintained composure shattered. Her eyes filled with tears that she clearly didn't want to fall. Her clasped hands tightened until her knuckles went white. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically discussing what to do. This was completely off script. But Steve Harvey, in his decades of television, had earned the right to trust his instincts. And his instincts were screaming that something important was happening. "You don't have to answer that," Steve said gently. "But I want you to know something, Maya. I see you. Right now, in this moment, I see you." Something in Steve's words broke through whatever wall Maya had built around herself. Her hand moved to the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small spiral notebook, the kind students carry. She flipped it open to a page that looked like it had been written and rewritten many times. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. She held the notebook up so Steve could read it. The handwriting was neat, careful, the words of someone who had spent a long time finding exactly the right ones. "I've been invisible my whole life. To my parents, I'm the fragile one who needs to be protected. To my teachers, I'm the quiet one who never causes problems. To my classmates, I'm the weird girl who doesn't talk. Today, I just wanted to be seen, but I guess I don't know how to be anything else." Steve read the words twice. When he looked up at Maya, his eyes were glistening. "How old were you when you stopped talking?" he asked. Maya held up her fingers. 1, 3, 13 years old, Steve repeated. 3 years of silence. Maya nodded, tears now streaming freely down her face. Steve stood up slowly and turned to face the camera directly, addressing not just the studio audience but everyone who would eventually watch this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying a weight that transcended entertainment. "We talk a lot about visibility in this world, about being seen, being heard, being acknowledged, but we don't talk enough about the people who learn to make themselves invisible because they think that's what everyone wants from them." He turned back to Maya. "Your family loves you, I can see that. But sometimes love looks like protection, and protection can feel like a cage." Behind the stage barrier, Patricia Johnson was crying. She stepped forward, but Steve gently held up his hand. "Not yet, Mama," he said kindly, but firmly. "This is Maya's moment." Steve walked back to Maya and did something unprecedented. He took the microphone from his lapel, the one he used for every show, every episode, every moment of his television career, and he clipped it onto Maya's cardigan. "This is yours now," he said. "Your voice, your words, your moment." The studio was completely silent. 300 audience members sat frozen, understanding that they were witnessing something sacred. "Maya," Steve continued, "I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Not for points, not for money, not for the game. Just for you. And you can answer however you want. You can write it, you can whisper it, you can shout it if that's what feels right. But I want you to answer with your voice. Nobody else's. Can you do that?" Maya looked at Steve for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. "First question," Steve said. "What do you want people to know about you?" Maya's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper but was entirely her own, she spoke. "I'm not broken," she said. Each word seemed to cost her something, but she pushed them out anyway. "I'm just scared." "Scared of what, sweetheart?" Steve asked gently. "Of being too much," Maya answered, her voice gaining slight strength. "Of saying the wrong thing. Of disappointing people. Of taking up space that someone else deserves more than me." The audience was openly crying now. Camera operators, crew members, even the competing Martinez family was wiping their eyes. "Second question," Steve said. "If you could say anything to your family right now, what would it be?" Maya looked toward the stage barrier where her mother, father, brother, and aunt stood watching. She took a deep breath that seemed to come from the bottom of her soul. "I love you," she said, her voice clearer now. "But I need you to let me be loud. I need you to let me make mistakes. I need you to let me fail and figure out how to get back up. I need you to stop protecting me from the world and start teaching me how to live in it." Patricia Johnson collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing. Not from hurt, but from the sudden, crushing realization of what 3 years of well-intentioned protection had done to her daughter. "Third question," Steve said, and now his own voice was thick with emotion. "What do you want for yourself, Maya? Not what your parents want, not what teachers want, not what anybody else wants. What do you want?" Maya stood up straighter. She looked directly into the camera, and when she spoke, her voice was stronger than it had been all day. "I want to be seen," she said. "Not as the girl with social anxiety. Not as the daughter who needs to be protected. Not as the quiet one who never causes problems. I want to be seen as Maya. Just Maya, with all my fears and all my hopes and all my messy, complicated feelings that I don't always know how to express." She paused, then added with a small smile that was real for the first time that day. "And I want to finish this game by giving my own answers." The studio erupted in applause. Not the prompted, enthusiastic applause of a game show, but the deep, emotional response of people who had just witnessed someone claiming their own voice. Steve smiled through his tears and held up his hand for quiet. "All right then," he said. "Now let's finish this game. Maya's way. And we're going to do something we've never done before. We're restarting Fast Money. All new questions, all Maya's answers. No help from anybody. Because it's time for Maya Johnson to be heard." What happened next was unprecedented in game show history. Steve asked 5 new questions, and Maya answered each one. Her voice was quiet at first, gaining strength with each answer. Some answers were on the board, some weren't. By the end, they had scored exactly 200 points. The family won their $20,000, but everyone in that studio knew the real victory had nothing to do with money. As confetti fell and celebration music played, Steve pulled Maya aside one more time. "I'm giving you something," he said, pulling out his phone. "This is my actual personal number. Not my manager, not my assistant, mine. And I'm going to check in with you once a month for the next year. Not to push you, not to fix you, not to make you into something you're not, just to remind you that being seen is your right, not a privilege you have to earn." He handed her a card with the number written on it, then added, "And one more thing. I'm setting up a meeting with someone who helped my own daughter work through social anxiety. Because you're right, Maya. You're not broken. But that doesn't mean you have to figure this out alone. 6 months later, the episode aired with minimal editing. The producers had wanted to cut some of the more emotional moments, worried it was too heavy for a game show. Steve had refused. "This is exactly what people need to see," he'd said. "Real humans having real moments." The response was overwhelming. The episode became the most watched Family Feud episode in history. But more importantly, it started a conversation. Thousands of messages poured in from teenagers who saw themselves in Maya. Parents reached out, realizing they had been doing the same thing to their own children. Mental health organizations used clips from the episode to illustrate what social anxiety actually looks like, beyond the stereotypes. Maya herself became an unexpected voice in the mental health awareness space. She started a YouTube channel where she posted videos, her face on camera, her voice clear and growing stronger with each upload. She talked about social anxiety, about learning to take up space, about the difference between protection and support. A year after the episode aired, Maya sent Steve a video message. In it, she was standing in front of a crowd at her school, giving a speech about mental health awareness to an auditorium full of students. "A year ago," she said in the video, her voice steady and strong, "I couldn't order food at a restaurant without my mom speaking for me. Today, I just gave a speech to 300 people. And you know what I realized? Being seen isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about showing up as yourself, even when yourself is scared or messy or uncertain. Because the world needs all of us, not just the confident ones." Steve kept that video on his phone. And every time someone asked him about his proudest moment in television, he didn't talk about awards or ratings or viral moments. He talked about a 16-year-old girl with a notebook who taught him that sometimes the most important thing you can do is give someone the microphone and step, because being invisible isn't a choice. That being seen, that's something we can give each other, one brave moment at a time.